which is arguably the best and most accessible way that you have direct access to your local representatives as they are grappling with the issues that affect each and every one of us at both the state and local level. We want to recognize a couple of important groups of people as well as our sponsors before getting started. For the Chamber Platinum sponsors that sponsor our events all throughout the year, we want to give a special thanks to Big O Tires, Citizens Bank, Community Ford, American Legion Post 103, Showtime Cinema, who's also your host today, Greg Hubler Chevrolet, and Nice Pack in Mooresville. For our gold sponsors for the Mooresville Chamber of Commerce in 2019, also sponsoring each and every one of our events, we have First Merchants Bank, Carlisle Branson Funeral Service, Home Bank, South Central Indiana REMC, and Ward's Apparel. Let's give these platinum and gold sponsors a round of applause for their support. And then specifically today, we want to give recognition to two other chamber members and sponsors that specifically contributed to underwriting today's event here in the Third House session. We want to give a special thanks to Pamela Siddons of Siddons Law Office, who is here with us, as well as Banning Engineering. Please thank Pamela and Banning for their support of this event specifically. Also want to recognize a couple individuals in the room. If you are a local elected official serving in local government, we would love for you to stand so we can thank you for your service as well. Let's give a round of applause to these local officials. We have everything from our townships to county sheriff, county treasurer, and others in the room as well. That's an important group, but they're not near as important as the men and women who have bravely served our country, that have defended our freedoms and protected us and given us the opportunity to have events like this and to have a representative government. If you have served in any branch of our United States military, we would ask that you please stand as well so we can say thank you. Thank you very much. You are deeply appreciated. The last group I want to say thank you to is the two folks that are at the table with me. They are called part-time legislators. That's almost an oxymoron. This job, I am sure, comes at them 24/7 all throughout the year. Long session or short, it's really a 24/7 job under the guise of part-time position, part-time compensation. We're incredibly blessed in Morgan County. No disrespect to the other 148 men and women that serve in the legislature, but these two folks up here are far from backbenchers. They're both at the front seat at the table making the big decisions that affect Indiana. We're grateful for your service and we appreciate you being here today. Let's give a round of applause to Representative Mayfield and Senator Bray. We've got about an hour and a half to have a conversation with these two individuals. I'm going to have them introduce themselves and tell them a little bit about the district that they serve. They can do that better than I. And then we're going to go into kind of a chat up here between the three of us about some of the major issues, the headline issues, if you will, that have been circling through the General Assembly in Indiana this session. Before diving into some of the bills specifically that they're working on, and then we'll open up and spend probably the majority of our time on questions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Senator Bray for an introduction.
Thank you, Ryan, very much, and appreciate you being here. Appreciate everybody being here. Rod Bray, Senate District 37, and that consists of all of Morgan County. I also have the western third of Johnson County, White River Township, Union Township, and Hensley Township. And then I also have the northern tier of Owen County, including Gosport, and southern half of Putnam County, Cloverdale, Greencastle, those areas. So that's the district.
That's all you're going to say about yourself? Representative Peggy Mayfield. I represent from Mooresville, kind of down the center of Morgan County, about 2/3 of it, east of the White River, or 67, all the way down to the eastern side of Monroe County, right up into parts of Bloomington, up to the border of Indiana University's property. I serve as Assistant Majority Floor Leader. I also serve on Ways and Means, Public Policy, and the Insurance Committees.
And you were both elected in 2012, so this is your 7th session, is that correct? Okay. So the state passes a 2-year budget, and this is a budget year. And if you get nothing else done between January and the end of April, you have to at least pass a budget. Peggy, Representative Mayfield, you serve as the Assistant Majority Floor Leader, but one of your probably most important tasks is to serve on the Ways and Means Committee. So talk to us a little bit about how your service on Ways and Means is different in a budget year and some of the things that are going on with the fact that this is a budget year.
It's very interesting. Ways and Means, committees typically meet once a week during the session. Ways and Means meets nearly every day, and sometimes twice a day. We might meet again upon adjournment. So it's a very time-consuming committee. We deal with any appropriations of our $34 billion. Anything that changes or has an impact of over $50,000, if a fee is introduced, we also deal with that. It's amazing where our money comes from in the state, and in your handout, it kind of has a little bit of a breakdown of where those funds come from. And the budget process itself, wait a minute. Well, I put in what we spend it on. I guess I didn't put in where it comes from. About half of our budget comes from sales tax. About 40% comes from income taxes. And then the rest is a smattering of fees that are distributed amongst different industries. So that means that our budget is highly dependent on the economy. And if it should take a downturn, it affects what we had planned to appropriate for any given program. And adjustments have to be made. We experienced that back around 2009, 2010, when everyone kept getting cut and cut and cut. And I think that finally the last area of the budget that they had to cut was education. And you can see that in the chart here. There's a bar chart talking about the different, I put this together a little bit different than I had. I think I forgot that graph. Where we had to get into the tuition reserves. Oh, there it is. It's multicolored graph right there on the bottom. You can see it dip, the gray area being the percentage that we deem appropriate and a safe reserve for the state. Right now we're looking at $1.8, $1.9 billion in reserves, so that if that should happen again, or if a program comes up that we need immediate money, we have it there. Just since I've been in office, everyone has wanted to get into that $1.8 billion reserve to fund something or other, and I'll bet we've probably spent it 8 times over and never had a plan to replenish it. So it takes a lot of discipline to say no to a lot of people for some very worthwhile programs, but if they're absolutely necessary. And it would have wiped out our only fund with no plan to replenish it, and that's a big thing. Using it is one thing, replenishing it has to be part of the plan. So the state is in a great position. You can see at the top of that page how we're #1 in state government, #1 for the best in doing business in the Midwest. We are in the top 5, top 10 of nearly every category. A decade ago, we were at the bottom of all these categories. So we have really worked our way. It took a lot of hard work and a lot of discipline to get there. The budget process itself is several months. It actually starts in the summer, last summer, when the agencies are asked to put together what you think you need to spend next year. And then that goes, it's presented to the budget committee. Then they take those suggestions and they tweak it based on what we have as revenue forecasts. They go back to the agencies and say, we think you can live with this much, and then they have to go back and do it again. Then it goes to the budget committee. Then it comes to Ways and Means in the beginning of the session, and we hear every agency's budget. They make a presentation to us, their wants and needs. And then we have to decide based on our revenue forecast that we get in December what we can allocate. We can't fill those, plug the final numbers in until we get the revenue forecast in April. And that's why it seems like when people say, you have one job to do, is pass a budget, why do you always wait till the end to do it? Because we don't get the revenue forecast until 2 weeks before we adjourn. So while we're creating a skeleton of fill in the blank and playing with a lot of numbers, we don't have those final numbers until mid-April. And depending on whether the collections are up or down, we have to make adjustments, make the decisions, decide who's going to get a reduction or an increase. And that makes it sometimes very difficult. I'll stop there.
Thank you for that great overview. And it's important to note that that reserve that the state has, when you look at a $34 billion budget over 2 years, that's really only a rainy day of 6, 7, 8 weeks. And so while the number is large, the protection against a downturn is not as significant in your mind as the number is. And I think the state has made wise decisions on protecting that. So Senator Bray, last year you spent the session as the majority floor leader. This year you are, did you get demoted or was it a promotion? Pro tem of the Senate. So the Lieutenant Governor presides over the Senate, and you preside over the Senate in her absence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But there's a whole host of other responsibilities and duties that come along with that. And to say that it has probably changed your workload and your focus during your time in the legislature is probably an understatement. So could you describe to the audience the difference, kind of what it's like in that position versus the position you were in before, and how it's kind of changed your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And it has had a drastic impact on the way I spend my days now. It's the honor of my life. It's something I really, really appreciate having trusted me with this new responsibility. And you're exactly right. When you look at the Lieutenant Governor is the one that presides over the Senate most days, and Suzanne Crouch, our Lieutenant Governor, takes that job very seriously. So she's there almost every day unless some other major responsibility pulls her away. And in fact, we've made it through the first half of the session, and I've really only gone up to the podium and grabbed the gavel 3 times, and on Thursday I was there all day because she had to be out of the city the entire day. But that's not really what the responsibility is. That's really just making sure that the Senate runs while we're in session in chamber. But the real responsibility that I have is just running the Senate, and that includes the back office piece and dealing with the human resources pieces, of course. That's a part of it that, frankly, I didn't really expect, but is part of the job. The other things that I did expect, so my responsibilities are I appoint the chairman of all the committees, so I get to make that decision. I also appoint, with some of my leadership team, the members of each of those committees, and it's difficult to make everybody happy when you do that, I can tell you. But that's the responsibility. I assign every bill that comes into the Senate that it gets filed in December and January. There were about 639 of those this year to different committees. And I just completed signing all the House bills that passed the House and came over to the Senate, and I placed those in committees as well. And I spend my day now very differently than I used to. Over the past few years, as you know, even as Majority Floor Leader, I was also Judiciary Chair, a committee that I really, really enjoyed. And I also had, 6 to a dozen bills each session that I tried to advocate for and get passed. Now I really don't sit on any committees, and I don't file any bills. You can, but I don't know the last time the President Pro Tem actually filed and authored a bill of his own. Because for a number of reasons, there are other people there that can, if you have a bill idea, when I have a bill idea, I give it to somebody else and they try and usher it through. So my days look very different. I spend my days talking to people who are interested in advocating for or killing legislation, trying to find a line item to get put in the budget, and then I kind of circulate around and talk to my leadership team, and we decide whether those things are good ideas and when they're not, and what it needs to look like. And so it's a very unique, different experience for me. It's one I've enjoyed very, very much. And I think I told a couple of people this morning. And usually by the halfway session, I'm starting to look toward the finish line. And this year it's gone so fast that I haven't gotten there yet. I'm just trying to look to next week and see what we can do with that. But it's been a unique and experience. It's a big honor for me that I really enjoyed.
Thank you. I know this is a public forum, but I think I can speak on behalf of our local community when we say that we're glad that you're in the position that you're in. Morgan County chose well, and the state of Indiana chose well. And we thank both of you for that. We're going to tackle a couple of the headline issues. Probably some of the questions they don't want me to ask, but maybe we'll just deal with them right up front. These are the things that you see on the front page of the newspaper. They can tell you better than I. They probably take up a disproportionate amount of the public oxygen, probably relative to the discussion that takes place within the chambers, because obviously you have a lot of business to conduct in a short period of time. We're going to start off with hate crimes and bias crimes. Obviously, this is an issue that gets a lot of the headlines. Indiana is one of only a few states with a hate or bias crime statute. Some people look at that as a good thing, that we don't need to prosecute thought or continue to section people off into different lists. Others look at it as a blemish on the state, something that may impede our ability to attract business and industry. The bill started off in the Senate. My understanding is now in the House. So I'd like for both of you to talk to me a little bit about, or talk to all of us about this issue, its importance, maybe to some degree it's overstating, if that's how you feel, and just kind of walk us through how it's progressed through the legislature thus far, and how you envision it ending. And I'm going to start with you, since that's where the bill originated.
Yeah, happy to talk about this. It's one that gets an awful lot of attention, but Ryan, you were exactly correct. We spend the bulk of our time working on lots of other issues that might have a larger impact on Hoosiers and our citizens in the state of Indiana. But this one obviously gets a lot of attention, so it's worth talking about. And so when there were about 4 different bills, and all with a little bit slightly different styles, that were filed in the Senate on this subject. And because it's such a hot button issue, I decided to put all of those bills into the Rules Committee, which is one I chair, but it's a committee that very rarely meets. And to hold them there until we as a caucus, our Republican caucus, could discuss the idea and get a sense of where it is that we wanted to go with this. And as you might imagine, there are some, we've got 40 members in a 50-member Senate, so there's a very wide variety of opinion on lots of subjects, including this one. We talked about it as a group, and what we ended up doing was coming out with a particular bill, and it was changed. It came through a committee, and it was changed. And at the end of the day, there's kind of 2 schools of thought here on the bias crimes, if you're going to do something. One is you have a list of protected characteristics, or the second one is you just make it very general in nature, meaning that if a crime is committed as a result of bias, then the judge can amplify that sentence a little bit or aggravate that sentence. And so what we decided as a body was that maybe the way to go was the more general way, primarily for a couple different reasons. But probably the biggest is simply this, that I think that we don't really, our caucus felt like we don't really do ourselves a favor or bring the state together when we partition ourselves out into different groups or classes. And so the way that the bill is read when it came out of the Senate, and it passed out of the Senate, now it's over in the House, and they're going to they're starting to grapple with it now, it just simply says, if you are a victim as a result of bias, and bias is just the general term, then the judge can aggravate that sentence. And so let me give you an example of how that would work. And this would apply to any type of bias that you might find. If somebody were to, first thing I want to say is, I don't want to talk too long on this, but I want to try and explain it. If this statute will not come into play at all unless you are convicted of a crime that exists today. Battery, murder, whatever the case may be, criminal mischief, and you damage somebody's property. So there is nothing that you would have to commit a crime that exists today for this to come into play at all. And then, if you get convicted of that crime, let's say it's battery, or graffiti on a synagogue, like the experience that we saw this summer. And then the judge finds the judge or the jury convicts you of that crime, then the judge determines what your sentence will be. And in Indiana, the way we do sentencing is there is a kind of a range of time. So let's take a level 2 felony. That's generally a very serious crime. And the lowest range of that penalty will be 10 years. The highest range on a level 2 felony would be 30 years. And the mid-range is 17 and a half years. And the mid-range simply means this. A judge will give you 17 and a half years on a level 2 felony if there is nothing that would mitigate your conviction, meaning things that would kind of help excuse this or would kind of go in your favor. Things like you've never been in trouble before, you've always managed to hold down a full-time job, things that show that you've been responsible in your life. The other thing a judge looks at are aggravating factors. And if you have a lot of aggravating factors, that 17 and a half year sentence, the judge can take it up to the 30-year sentence, so a pretty wide range there. Aggravating factors are if you have a lot of criminal convictions in your past already, if you, different things like that. And so this bias is one of those aggravating factors, so that if your crime was motivated because of the color of a person's skin, then the judge could amplify that sentence or aggravate that sentence from 17 and a half years up to 30 years, or maybe 17 and a half years up to 20 years, whatever the judge decides is appropriate. So that's how this would work, and the Senate as a body just decided that we're better off making sure that everybody is protected from bias rather than make some particular classes or characteristics that are protected from it. And now, like I said, the Senate has to try and, the House has to look at this and decide if they can get behind and support a bill or what the language will look like, and so I'll turn it over to Representative Mayfield to discuss.
And as you said, that's what we're grappling with now. Senate Bill 12 originally had very different language. Do we think that our current law is sufficient? What are the potential unseen consequences of whatever we decide to work with? And is what we have right now, is it not working? And that's some of the data that's really never been brought up, is how many cases have judges ruled on utilizing our current language? Have they used the aggravating circumstances because of bias? And we really can't get that data as quickly as we would like. The talking about how Indiana would be, a backward state, we're going to lose business and so forth. Well, in that handout also, I have how Indiana is in the top 5 of so many different categories. And if we are such a backward state, you don't get there without having a lot of other reasons why people want to come here. So that's part of our thinking too, is how much would this enhance if we pass something? How much would it enhance Indiana, or would it not do anything at all? So you'll see a lot, and we'll have a lot of private conversations about that, and it's been assigned to courts. I think also Senate Bill 12 is based on the Whitmer case, state Supreme Court ruling, where our Supreme Court ruled you can take anything, including bias, into consideration when you're coming up with your sentencing. So they kind of gave a very guidelines.
Marijuana legislation this year, is that correct? But other states are dealing with it. You've had states such as Colorado, Washington, and others move forward with various versions of medical or even complete recreational use of marijuana. There's been a couple of years in the case of Colorado, just as one coming to mind, where you can start to look at some of the pros and cons of legislation. And just curious what you think of these issues in the state's future. There are obviously a couple of passionate lawmakers that are going to continue to bring this to the table. The governor has been very clear on his position with the issue, that it's up to the federal government to change the controlled substance classification of marijuana before he would look at anything. So kind of set up a big topic, but just from a policy level and what you're seeing from other states, what do you see in Indiana's future regarding this issue?
Well, I'll weigh in a little bit. So, first of all, just know that I'm not a supporter of that type of legislation, either recreational marijuana or medicinal marijuana, frankly. Unless, on the medicinal piece, I'll talk a little bit about that because there's, I guess, a caveat to my position there. The challenge about this subject is it's sometimes difficult to know exactly what a person's talking about when you're talking about this. So, a couple of examples. Indiana passed something to deal with that, and we can talk about that a little bit too. But CBD oil is something that is it's not marijuana. It's not capable of giving you a high. The THC level in it is 0.3% or less. It's required to be 0.3% or less. And there is some objective medical basis for that. People seem to take that and it makes some of their pains go away if they have a bad back or bad knee. And so there's been some success of people using that and trying to get off of opioids as a result. But we're not talking about marijuana when we talk about that. We've got a bill that we're talking about this year that's probably going to pass that deals with industrial hemp. Again, not marijuana, not capable of giving you a high, 0.3% of THC or less. And these things were permitted by the federal government in a 2014 agricultural bill that then allows these products to kind of come out. It never, ever makes any sense to me for the state to legalize something that is illegal. Federalist system. And if we completely just disregard the authority of our federal government, then we've got probably a bigger problem on our hands. The second idea is, it seems to strike me as ironic that we're trying to talk about legalizing a tobacco product when we're trying to find all the ways we can to get people to quit smoking. So that seems to be two policies that are going in the wrong direction. And you know, when you talk about medical marijuana and the states that have medical marijuana, it really, to me, doesn't look like medical marijuana. If you go to Florida or California and you go in there and you say, you know, I've got a hangnail, I think I need something for my pain, and you get marijuana, it's simply a shortcut to recreational marijuana, in my opinion. Now, that's not to say that it might be possible that there may be some medicinal benefits to marijuana. If you had to press me, I would tell you that I suspect that the CBD and those products that have 2.3% or less of THC probably have the same medical benefits. But at the very least, we need to objectively know if there are medical benefits, and that means there's maybe having one of our universities start to look at that for the federal government. I don't have any idea if that will go anywhere, but just the idea that we objectively know if there are medical benefits would be a really good idea before we wade into anything like that. Otherwise, I just don't think there's any merit here for the state in the state of Indiana. Now, there are consequences for Indiana, too, because of other states that are close by that are legalizing marijuana, Michigan, for example. You know, there are problems with the medical marijuana that we know from looking at Colorado. You have some mental health problems that are a result of it, schizophrenia even. The probably most practical is that you've got a higher percentage of people that are operating vehicles while they are impaired as a result of that. The evidence very clearly shows that in some of these states that have legalized it. So we've got to try to grapple with that, because inevitably people are going to go to Michigan and get some of that product and come back here. They're going to drive around our roads and endanger us as a result of the ease of the ability to get that product. So whether we do anything or not, and I do not think we will do anything, not for a long time, until we have some really clear evidence to suggest there's some benefit or medical benefit to it, that we're going to have to contend with the issue.
And I have very similar feelings. I think that discussion will happen, but not in the next year or two. And Indiana moves forward very slowly, some people say. I think it's very deliberately, I would prefer to say, because we want to make sure we have the information. All of the anecdotal evidence and the reports and the studies that say it is beneficial, they may be accurate. I'm not ready to hang my hat on those studies, because none of them are done with at least the same standards as an FDA-approved drug. So as we have one doctor down in Bloomington that works through the IU system, and he talks about the endocannabidiol system. Your body has a system that actually processes this. And he's become convinced that there is a role for this. But it's one thing to understand exactly how it affects the human body long term and at what ages. So I think that conversation will happen. Rod talked about hemp. I always try to distinguish it. Think rope, not dope. The difference between industrial hemp and cannabis. And I've always supported that. I've willing to discuss the decriminalization of the small amounts. You get caught with a joint, does that warrant jail time, or does it warrant another kind of punishment? Medical marijuana, open to the discussion, just don't have the kind of information that I think is necessary to make an informed decision. Legalization of recreational, I'm not sure where I stand on that. I've been to the pot farm up at Purdue. I've got the cannabis research part, I call it the pot farm. And even up there, when you talk to, Ron Turco is the researcher, all of the things that they said about hemp, it can grow in any kind of environment. It's very resistant to insects and other things. Well, they started doing that, and I went up there to see. They have all these different plots, testing different kinds of insecticides and different types of water drainage, and they contradicted most of what was published about how hardy hemp can be. It is not as hardy as they think, but it's very much like corn as far as the soil types that Indiana has. So we were talking about, do we want to get into an industrial hemp industry for Indiana's farmers? We do have a great soil to do that when that time comes. But what came out is what they put in all these studies about how great it is not what it's turned out to be. So that kind of gives you pause before you move forward with this. You just want to have some good information.
Can I add something real quick on kind of a peripheral issue of the subject? And I referenced it. So, as I indicated, Indiana has allowed CBD to be in the state legally. Again, that's with 0.3% or less of THC. But we've had a problem that has popped up, and it's a problem across the state. But in particular here, it's a local problem where a store sells this product, and the form that it can take is sometimes it's oil, sometimes it's leafy vegetation, and so you buy some leafy vegetation that is supposed to be the 0.3% or less. And maybe it is, or maybe it was, or maybe the person that bought it has emptied that container out and put what he thinks is better stuff in there that actually is a legal substance. And it's very difficult for us right now to tell the difference between those things. And our state lab doesn't really have the ability to tell the difference, to quantitatively test that to see if it's 0.3% or less, or if it's a higher percentage and therefore illegal. And so there are various places across the country that do that. Some are expensive, some aren't so expensive, and I've been trying, in fact, locally to help our prosecutor find those places so we can get that testing done. But the other thing that we're trying to do now, the budget's been passed over to the Senate. One of my priorities is to get some money in there for some machinery for the state police to begin to test that. The governor's on board with it. I've had lengthy conversations with him, and he likes the idea as well. We just need to be able to grapple with this. And when you have a suspicion and you've got a product here in Morgan County or Mooresville or anywhere in the state, if you take that and you have probable cause to think that it might be an illegal substance, our state police lab needs to be able to test that. So we're trying to come up with 3 machines that can do that, so we can have those across the state and be able to adequately address that issue. And I think we're going to get that done.
Thank you. I asked the question not to put you on the spot, but to give you a chance to talk in depth about something that, once again, the headlines and the sound bites don't do the topic justice. And there are a lot of various layers to the issue, and none of these issues are simple. Teacher pay. I think everyone in the room would stipulate that teachers have one of the hardest jobs out there, and that to the extent that they can be compensated more, I think probably everyone is for that. The question comes in with the amount of the budget the state budget that is already going to K through 12. It's somewhere north of 50%, I believe. The other added element is that teachers actually contract with the local school district that sets a rate of pay and a term of employment. The headlines tend to think that it's completely within your control. Talk to us a little bit about that, where you are on the issue, and maybe this would be an opportunity to talk about some of the other K through 12 issues that may be going on. But let's address teacher pay and that issue that's circulating through the legislature right now.
First, do you want to go first?
Sure. Okay, teacher pay basically started in the House, in our not in the budget, but, well, somewhat in the budget. That's where we do all of our education funding. But the most important thing to remember about teacher pay is the state does not pay teachers. The state funds school systems. The school systems negotiate with their teachers. So if you want the state to pay the teachers, I think it's only fair that the state control every expense that goes along with education too, which basically means we're going to become a statewide school board. And that's not really what I believe that any of the teachers or education systems want. More than 80% of the school systems throughout the state gave teachers a raise the previous cycle. So it's not like teachers are not getting raises out there. It's how the state, how the school districts have decided to allocate their funds. The emphasis of House Bill 1003, which is the transparency bill, where the goal is for a school district to spend 85% of their money in the classroom and only 15% on operations and other, is to help school systems basically become transparent to their constituents. I will say that in our county, Martinsville school system has met the 85, they're over the 85%, so they've made some very good, very tough decisions in order to funnel as many dollars to the classroom as they can. Mooresville, their information is in this book. Right now they're at like 83.5, and remember, this is the first year we've done that, and 83% was the average across the state, so they are average with the state. The goal would be to be a little bit higher, but if a school system does not reach that goal, what we have asked them to do is explain why. It's not a mandate. So if your school has taken on bonding because they wanted to do something else, or if they need more teachers, they want to have more mental health counselors, they want to have another safety officer, maybe they need more IT people because you've gone one-to-one on technology. Those are all increases in non-teacher pay. And so all we're asking is the reason why. You have to explain that in a public meeting. And I think that there's even a couple of school systems that are down in the 60%, but because of the makeup of their area, their families are quite happy with that. So we are increasing, we're putting in $611 million of new money this budget cycle. Basically, about 67% of the new money going into the budget that is not being dedicated to DCS or Medicaid is focused on K-12 education. 67% of all the new dollars of the entire budget. So $611 million is going into education. I think that school systems, just like anybody else, if anyone has a 25-year-old making 60 grand and can't seem to get ahead, it's because the money's sifting through their fingers and they've never taken the time to write down what they're spending their money on and taking a good look at it. I think there are some school systems that have operated like that. They've always done something a certain way. They've never analyzed it. They've never taken a good look at where they can cut their expenses. And this bill is sort of forcing them to do that and maybe reconsidering how they're doing their money.
Well, I think, thank you, Peggy, that's a great explanation of what's going on. The challenges that we have is, I've been asked a couple times specifically, well, why don't you pass a bill that says teachers get paid more money? And two reasons that we don't are simply, one, there's elected school boards that have that authority, and we don't want to infringe upon that. And the second is the local collective bargaining that the school boards and the teachers engage in. And I haven't had a single person tell me that they want us to pull them at that, probably for good reason. So, but the important thing is we're having a good conversation. The people are beginning to understand exactly how those education dollars work, and that the state has the ability to send money to the school districts, but that the school districts and their elected school boards delineate that out as to exactly where that goes. Our responsibility is to continue to try to drive more money to those schools, and we're going to continue to do that. The amount of money in our general fund budget, about $34 billion, but just under 52% of that goes to K through 12 schools. And as a percentage of the budget, that puts us third in the nation as far as a priority. There's only 3 or 2 other states that put a higher percentage of their general budget into their K through 12 school system. So it's a priority for us. And we recognize how valuable it is to continue to compensate teachers for 2 reasons. First, so that we can attract young, talented people to the profession. And second, it seems to me to continue to retain those folks, because after they've taught for 5 or 6 years and they look around and think there's opportunities in other industries to make more money, and we begin to lose those that are really talented. So it's a priority for us, and we need to keep our eye on it.
Thank you. A couple of quick questions that maybe not quite as weighty as some of these other issues. Peggy mentioned a little bit ago, and Indiana consistently ranks top in this, top in that, 5th in this. CEO magazine, top-rated airport 7 years in a row. Indiana is firing on all cylinders, economically, fiscally. We are the envy of our states around us, and perhaps arguably the envy of the nation when it comes to efficient, effective state government. What more is left to do? And how do we keep that position as other states, particularly neighboring states, may pick up on and attempt to, although I think all hope is lost in Illinois, other states that have some more sense are going to start to duplicate and replicate what we've done. So as policymakers, and I know you have cohorts that you have to work with, it's not your choice alone, but what do you see Indiana doing over the next couple of years to keep ourselves in those rankings, and maybe even improve on the few rankings where we're getting beat by other neighboring states?
Not sitting back on our laurels is the very first thing I'm thinking of. Making sure that our state's economy is diversified enough that if one area of a segment of the economy falters, then it does not have a huge impact like manufacturing did a few years back. Indiana is now attracted enough tech companies that we are being called the Silicon Prairie instead of the Silicon Valley out in California. We are very business friendly. Then there are some worries that come along with that, because tech companies generally don't have a physical presence. It's not like they're building a plant that keeps them here. They can pick up and leave and go anywhere. So we have to always be sharp to make sure that we're attracting people and keeping people, and always thinking just a little bit ahead, because heavy is the head that wears the crown.
No doubt about that. I've had a unique experience over the last several months to be able to travel around to different sort of legislative conventions, and I can say with pride, and it's not pride that I can put on me, but the past leadership in the Senate and the House and the governors that we've had, from Holcomb to Pence and certainly going back to Daniels, and people come up to me and ask me how we've done it. The Senate leader in Iowa, for instance, has done that. The Senate leadership in Pennsylvania, and all across the country, they come up to and ask how Indiana has been able to put itself in the position that it's in. And I take an awful lot of pride in the people that have served Indiana over the last several years in the position that they've put us in. And but Peggy's right, you can't rest on your laurels. If you're doing the status quo, then that means you're falling behind a bit. And the other thing we need to keep in mind, I was listening to an economist in January. This is not to be a negative naysayer or Cassandra, but we've had about 115 months of economic expansion in the nation, as a nation. And the nation has never experienced an expansion that lasted longer than 120 months. So suffice to say that we're not going to continue to enjoy the expansion we've had forever. There are circumstances that are outside of Indiana's control that can begin to really challenge our economy and things that are going on. But nevertheless, there's a lot of things that still remain important for us to do. A couple specifics, at least on my agenda as we go forward in the next few years, is that the difference, there's a growing difference between rural Indiana and urban Indiana and the opportunities that are provided there. And there's lots of reasons for that, I suspect. And we find actually the population in those rural parts of Indiana are decreasing because people are migrating to where those opportunities are. Broadband internet, high-speed internet is absolutely a requirement for us to get that done in rural Indiana so those folks can be viable. Their kids can be in school and use their Chromebooks without having to go to McDonald's or Starbucks or the library. And the mom and dad can surf the internet and start a little business of their own and have communication with the outside world much more effectively. So that is something that we have to continue to try and crack. We're doing that now, but it's going to have to be done in multiple different ways to really get internet to the last mile. There are some areas of the state that have kind of tried to attack their economic development in a regional way. You'll never see Indiana, at least as far as I'm concerned, kind of try to dictate that. But as communities look around and see advantages in acting in a regional way, take the Fort Wayne area, for example, they've got 11 different counties they meet on a very regular basis, and they're putting together some really comprehensive policies that are trying to attract a lot of business generation there, and it's pretty impressive. So that's something that we can continue to help with, and also just finding ways to encourage entrepreneurship here in the state of Indiana. There's lots of things that we can be doing to help focus that so people can grow their own businesses and create jobs and put people to work.
And I mentioned earlier how Indiana kind of thinks things through before we move. So that's another challenge we have as a state. We're very thoughtful and deliberate before we move because we want to do it right. And sometimes in these industries, you got to be a little more aggressive. So that's a challenge that we have as a state.
Very good. A diversified economy, probably the most important element of that when you think of areas that have been economically challenged like Detroit. You know, you can think instantly Detroit and think heavy auto manufacturing. If you think of West Virginia, you instantly think of coal. In Indiana, to both of your points, we're getting more and more known for tech. We remain a very dominant agriculture state. We're one of the top states for manufacturing. And the list just goes on, and we have been developing a diversified economy thanks to current and past leadership. What's the most surprising or strange issue that has popped up this session that you didn't anticipate? And I thought hate crimes was the tough question.
Something came up yesterday. I spent about 45 minutes to an hour on, and I was thinking, man, I can't believe I'm spending this kind of time on a little amendment from a Senate bill that's coming over. There's a bill being introduced, or got through the Senate, about compressed air guns, like the pellet guns and so forth, and having them on school property and on school buses and so forth. So they're going to make pointing one of those at somebody else on those specific properties, like a school bus or a playground, a misdemeanor. But when it came to the House, they took out one word, and suddenly the whole bill would make having a Nerf gun on a bus a crime. So I was trying to work with an attorney. How do you properly draft an amendment that will not make a marshmallow gun or a Nerf gun a crime? So I was just thinking, here we are, we've got 3 or 4 people involved in this just to fix this unintended consequence of a bill that's really intended to keep a lot of kids safe.
That's a great example. Just a great example of how you can, if you're not careful and you don't read the language carefully, like Peggy's doing there, that you can come up with an unintended consequence, and it's so easy it can happen. So to answer that question, I don't know. I guess the one thing that popped into my mind, and this is a serious issue, so we need to kind of address it. But you see these issues come up, and I don't feel always adequate to grapple with them and make an informed decision. So it takes a while to get there. But we've been talking about the Senate, it passed out of the Senate, so it's over to the House, and they may continue to work on it, maybe improve it. But advanced practice nurses, nurses that can maybe work without a relationship, a contractual relationship with a doctor. And the idea there, of course, you have physician assistants and nurse practitioners who you go in and see for things, and because share some of that load, take some of the load off of the doctor, and there's real good reasons for that. Always in the past, it's been required that nurse practitioner have some sort of contractual relationship with a doctor who does a review of some of their work and their treatment plans. And we're talking this year about trying to maybe break that relationship. They would probably always have kind of a relationship to talk back and forth about ideas and things, but tend to break it to encourage more nurse practitioners, simply because we have a challenge in Indiana. We don't have enough family physicians and family doctors, and so we're trying to broaden the health care that's out in the state of Indiana. The question is, are they equipped with the training and the experience to see patients without necessarily having a close relationship with the physician? Are they able to recognize and diagnose things that a physician may be able to see and recognize and diagnose? And we've had lots of conversation about that, and it's a bill that passed, not with a lot of support, but it passed out of the Senate because of some trepidation there. And the House will continue to work on it and maybe improve it. But that's one of the issues that they come up that doesn't get a lot of press or headlines, but it's pretty important and it's pretty difficult to grapple with sometimes.
Last question, and then we'll have a full 55 minutes or so of questions from the audience. This one is really probably primarily for Representative Mayfield. What's the one issue or bill that you filed and are pushing on this year that you'd like to talk about, the top issue that you're attempting to advance through the legislature?
Well, for the first time in my legislative career, I actually maxed out on my 10 bills allowed filed. The House has a limit of 10 in a budget session and 5 in a non-budget session. And what I wanted to be my priority is really getting wrapped into more of the governor's agenda that won't require legislation, and that's reintroducing our ex-offenders into the workforce and what it takes to do that, and how can we not only encourage companies to do that, but protect them from potential lawsuits for the mere fact that they've hired an ex-felon and someone coming along saying, you should have known better, and then they sue the employer for something that the employee might have done. So I've been working with the governor's office on that, and we've always had separate legislation for ex-offenders, like a tax incentive or a program. And the governor has decided, we really just need to include ex-offenders in our workforce program, period, not as a separate line item. And so that's the direction he's going. So again, we spent a lot of time creating a bill that I don't need and didn't have to pursue because it's part of a broader agenda. Another one that came forth was from a police chief who wanted to send his reserves for training. They have to be trained on the breathalyzers, the radar guns. They have to maintain their CPR training every 2 years. And there are fees for those. Well, the statute says that they can use their law enforcement continuing ed training fund for employees. Well, reserves are not employees. So State Board of Accounts came back and said, you can't do that. Even if you have money, you can't use it for that. So I simply introduced a bill saying that if they wanted to, they could opt to use the money for their reserves as well. More and more agencies are turning to reserves to help support their full-timers. It's very expensive to have a full-time law enforcement officer. So the supplementing them and making sure they're properly trained, because we want to make sure that we get the protection that we expect and deserve. The other one, And the one that made the headlines is I am the author of the Abortion Matters, where a dismemberment abortion cannot be performed on a baby while it's still alive in the womb, and it would ban that practice. So that one is going over to the Senate for more debate.
Thank you very much. A lot of issues like the reserve bill make a big difference to our communities and individuals that serve, but no one really knows about it. And it's amazing what, little tweaks in the legislation or in the law, how big of an impact they can have, but they just don't get the headlines or the attention. So thank you for that update. We're going to move into questions. This is your opportunity for really to ask anything. The only rule that we have is we want to have a respectful dialogue, and I know with this audience that's exactly what we'll get. Representative Mayfield has also passed out red and yellow cards. I'm going to let them completely choose when to use those, but you may be asked to show your support or objection to a particular issue based on those cards. But at this point, we're going to spend the balance of our time talking about what's on your mind. Ms. Virginia.
Virginia Perry, and I'm looking at your graph here on the budget breakdown, and I'm a little concerned about the graph regarding the corrections and public safety. It seems like those figures should probably be reversed in order to have less corrections and more public safety. Has a legislator noticed that, or is that a topic of discussion? And I'll direct this to Peggy.
Well, I guess I can sort of. Does my voice carry to the back? No. No? Okay. I know it's absorbed.
This maintains pretty much what traditionally or historically what we've spent on those two categories. In the governor's budget, I thought I had to look because it said that his budget had 6%, and I thought, well, how could his be 3 times ours? Because he combines the two into a 6% between public safety and corrections. We have obligations in our prison system that we have to do, and so that's probably why it is heavier on that side. And some public safety is funded locally and not by state.
Next question.
Yeah, I have a question. There were a couple of 50-50 parenting time bills that were in the House and the Senate. I don't think they went anywhere, but I just want to know if equal parenting is on your radar and how you feel about that.
I don't know where those bills are either. I saw them as they kind of came through, and I can't tell you. I'm afraid to say that whether they kind of passed out of the initial House or not. I don't guess I think they have, but and so again, I can't really speak to those bills. I can tell you philosophically just a little about where the things are now. Their court rules essentially are establishing what parenting time visitation looks like now in the event of a divorce, or when there's maybe no marriage with a child, so you have a paternity suit. And the idea or the presumption is not 50-50, but rather, every other weekend, half the summer, there's alternating holidays, things of that nature. And I think there is a discussion going on about whether it should be 50-50. The one thing you have to be careful with there is that there is, I think, the courts have found over the years, and I'm inclined to think this is a possibility, that the child bouncing around all the time is not necessarily good. It's nice to have one bed you're normally going to sleep in, and but having at the same token, having a strong relationship with both parents is also vitally important. But the whole thing seems to me to be so contingent on the parents' ability to get along and share responsibly with that child, as opposed to, what did Mom say about me today? and that sort of a thing. I mean, that has a massive difference there. And I think we need to keep it in a circumstance so that the judges can make those best circumstances, because there's so many differences between parenting styles.
Actually, I don't think either bill, these bills moved at all either. But the Supreme Court had a big study, public comment last summer, I believe, where they took a lot of public comment about modifying what our parenting time guidelines should be. The judges, and the Supreme Court especially, they get very, very protective of when the legislature steps in. We can handle substantive issues. They get to handle all of the procedural issues, and they deem this to be part of the process of divorce, child support, and not a substantive issue. So I'm not even sure they really want our hands in it. Because to change it, it would require another change in law where they can change it based on a couple of public hearings, some feedback, and then they can make modifications much quicker than the legislature can.
It's a great question, and it yet another example of the disparate and diverse issues that are coming these folks' way every day, particularly during the session, but really all year long. Other questions? Trey?
So I'm a train enthusiast, and the last I heard, the Hoosier State Line was maybe facing an issue with funding. Has that been resolved through the budget, or do we have an idea of kind of how they would expect to fund that line if it's not something that the state supports and the local communities put into it already?
That's a great question, Trey, because we're talking about the India to Chicago line and $3 million. There's a lot of local investment that's been going in with that being part of the program. And now when you take out that, it's how much does West Lafayette and Rensselaer, how much investment will they still be willing to put into it? It was taken out in the House. That's only halfway through the process. I'm kind of hoping the Senate puts it back in, and then it'll be deliberated in the end. But it's just halfway through the process. Again, when we get our budget forecast in April, that will either say we have a little bit more, a little bit less, or are we right in line with our anticipated expenditures, and do we want to shuffle some of those around to accommodate some good programs?
I'll make a quick comment on that as well. I guess the Senate will take a look at that. I've had a couple people circle around to me to discuss it. But the other comment I thought I'd make, just to kind of add to the conversation about that, is that I've had a number of people that have come in and talked to me about trying to create a tax credit for some of these small local rail lines across the state of Indiana. And this isn't passenger, this is freight kind of things. And there are a few small lines, not the CSX and those kind of companies. They're massive and across the nation. But there are a handful of small rail lines just here in the state of Indiana that can seem to add some benefit to rural Indiana. And as we look at this idea of rural Indiana and trying to make it continue to be vibrant, the idea of having access to rail, I think, is a pretty good idea. So their idea is to give us some tax credits for investment we had into our bridges and our lines, so that we can keep the maintenance and upkeep, not necessarily building new, but just maintain what we have. And there's some merit to that. It's all about trying to look at it and see if there's enough space in the budget for it. But it's kind of an interesting and important conversation.
Other questions? Dean?
I'd like to point
You want
out
the microphone?
to the.
Oh, you didn't? I didn't know I was in.
Yeah, you're all close. I saw the look from both of you.
No, I actually, when I worked for the Higher Learning Commission, I used it to commute to Chicago. It's very convenient to get off the Crawfordsville station. I use it recreationally as well. So I was just curious where was that, because last I heard I didn't know. So.
But I would also make the comment that while maybe you didn't think the top farm, she's also been to prison 3 times?
5 times.
5 times.
Shoot,
So,
tell me
kind of
you have
equals out. Very interesting, some of the stuff.
Chelsea, and then we'll go to Dave.
Oh, sorry. Chelsea Mans. I
I can yell, that's okay, thank you.
I'd like to talk TIF. I'm sure you're shocked I want to talk TIF. Sorry. First of all, I'm going to talk particularly about Senate Bill 83. First of all, Senator Bray, thank you very much for your support.
In the Senate, I think I died, that's okay.
Hello, there we go. That one in particular, I think, would be hugely helpful in Mooresville. That is, that would allow 15%, up to 15% of the annual TIF revenues to be used for maintenance of TIF funded either partially or in full projects that have to do with infrastructure. So as we're sitting in Southbridge, everybody, I'm assuming, came up 67, you have to get here. So the medians that the Mooresville Redevelopment Commission used TIF funds for to update the Indiana Street project, both of those things would be able to be maintained through some TIF funds, and I think the town and the Redevelopment Commission would both greatly appreciate that legislation passing. With that, I know there's a few other TIF bills that are still live, so any questions, thoughts, concerns that you guys have going forward with any of those?
Thanks, Chelsea. You know, besides that bill, which I think has some merit, and they get passed out of the Senate, but there's a couple of others. There's a TIF bill that would impact or kind of limit. I think it's Jeffersonville and Walney down there, and they're kind of using TIF dollars to give tuition to Ivy Tech. Correct? I don't know if you're aware of that. You probably are. And there's some legislation that's trying to limit the ability to do that, under the idea that it's really not probably what RDC funds were intended for. I'd be happy to have either one of your opinions this week to talk afterward if you want to. And the other one that I think is interesting to me and maybe has some merit is the idea of allowing TIF dollars to be used for housing. And again, you just generally don't think of it that way because it's an economic development issue, but even here in Morgan County, we have housing is a real challenge for our economic development because there aren't places for folks to live, and new housing isn't coming up. And there's a couple reasons for it, and I say new housing, and that's not entirely true, but the housing that we need, there's very few homes that are being built at a cost of $125,000 to $200,000, maybe even $225,000. Lots of homes being built at $300,000, $400,000, but because of the cost of materials and because of the cost of labor, with our unemployment being at 3.6% or whatever it is right now, the cost of labor is becoming very expensive, and so electricians and plumbers and things like that are charging a premium because they can. And so it's making it really difficult to build a home or a subdivision of houses that are $150,000 to $175,000. They're just not being built at all. And that's putting a real strain on our system. And as we try to find workforce, that's one of the challenges we have. So there may be some merit to it just in case, because of the need we find ourselves in right now. Maybe I don't know if you have a thought on it.
The only thing that I think we've dealt with in the House was the spending TIF dollars, the RDC spending TIF dollars beyond the boundaries of the TIF. And I think that's what kind of makes us stop and think. When you think about, you're creating a TIF to collect the incremental taxes to be reinvested into that area, and now we have quasi-agencies spending it outside of those boundaries. And then, of course, as soon as you have someone abuse or take advantage of the process, you're going to have people screaming to the legislature, fix this. In that case, the mayor was providing TIF dollars to anyone who went to that particular high school to go to Ivy Tech for free for 2 years. And that was basically that was the program. There was no requirement that that child live in that school district. There was nothing about a child who lived in that school district that chose to go somewhere else. They didn't qualify for these dollars, even though they were within that particular school district. There was nothing about what they had to take, being a high demand credential or degree. It was just go. There was no requirement that they finish. There was no requirement that anything be fed back to the RDC about the success of the person getting a job in any certain area, or even getting a job in that area where those funds were collected that sent them to college. So we were trying to tighten that down. If you're going to use it, and it still can be used, but if you're going to use it, these are the parameters we think that you should think of. If they're redevelopment funds, let's make sure that redevelopment comes back to the people who are paying those taxes. And so that's what we're trying to fix there.
Thank you. We'll run up and grab Dave Nash.
Civics education is one of the things that has gotten a little bit of publicity this year, and as the son of a social studies teacher, it's one of them that I've taken a particular interest in then too. And although most of the focus has been on testing and for high school students on that, I noticed that the senator who made this proposal actually is one of the legislators who is most prone to putting unconstitutional bills together. So I wonder if perhaps you might consider a proposal that politicians take this test so that we know that they are representing the Constitution properly then as well. And I think anywhere from the township level up to the White House, we could see, if we saw some improved civics knowledge, we would see much better government right now. So what are your thoughts on that?
The other thing you wanted to add was that county government is working perfectly, right?
Well, Dave, it's funny, you're not the first to suggest that we all need to take that same test, and probably right. I think it's interesting that when we've been trying over the last few years to kind of get ourselves away from some of the time that students are spent testing, and so when you add another one like this, there's value in it, because I think we need as public servants and as students, that we need that knowledge, because we have to appreciate what we have. And what we have, frankly, is really special. And if you don't understand it, it's more difficult to appreciate it. So there's real value there. But on the same side of it, we have to consider how much time our students are spent in the class taking tests. This one is not going to have to be taken in class, it can be taken online and things. But nevertheless, it's another test that we have to take. So you have to sort of balance that out. But the intention has value.
I think that behind it all, Dave, is the fact that we need to engage people from the beginning. I won't say what occupation this person had, but I got a letter the other day. They were talking about a topic that we were addressing, and it was addressed to Congressman Mayfield, and there were several misspellings in it, and from someone I know should have known better. So you get that, and you just kind of roll your eyes, because if I had $1 for every time I was called a congressman, I probably wouldn't have to do any fundraising. But it has to be incorporated, and it used to be just in daily life, and now we've really gotten away from that to the point that it's I won't say getting dangerous, but the lack of civic knowledge is threatening our government system. So everything is constitutional until it's not, or the other way around. I mean, the Constitution itself is based on interpretation in many cases, and based on case law. So it's interesting how illegal one day is not the next, or vice versa. But if you don't know the system, you don't know how to change that.
It's a great question, and Peggy, I agree with what both of you said, but the comment that our system of government is under threat by those that don't understand it and choose not to educate themselves could not be any more true. And that's an issue that neither the Republicans nor the Democrats own. We all own that. And we all owe it to ourselves and to our government to educate ourselves. And there's soundbite and headline knowledge at what the federal government does. To some extent, that is probably true of state government as well, but to a lesser degree, and then virtually no understanding of what happens at the local level. So we do need to better educate our citizens, and to some extent, it's their obligation to do that. But it's a great conversation.
Sure. Ryan, your comments just sparked a comment I thought might be appropriate. So Peggy's absolutely right. You bump into somebody and they ask you how it's going in Washington, D.C., and that's fine, and you don't necessarily understand what my job is. But it's really important that people understand that. And the other thing that's really important is that understand that government, our federal system of government is better when everybody stays in their lane. And the true responsibilities, when you really look at the responsibilities in Washington, D.C., are very limited. Protecting our borders and treaties and trade, things of that nature there's only a handful of things that they're really responsible for. But nevertheless, they get involved in lots of different things, including really serious subjects like education. And a part of that is because when they come back to their district from Washington, D.C., they're who people see first on the news and in the newspaper because they're the bigger candidates and they're the bigger office holders and they get more press, and that's as it should be. But when they come home and they hear we've got to do something about our education, and they keep hearing that, then they go off to D.C. and they try and do something about our education. That doesn't really benefit us because a system of education that is done in Washington, D.C. that's going to be nationwide is not a system that's necessarily going to benefit every state better. Indiana is better off figuring out how to run its educational system than Washington, D.C. is figuring out how to run our educational system. The same thing goes for the state and the local level. Things that come to myself and Representative Mayfield, there's a number of issues that we can deal with and should deal with. But again, a lot of the issues really are things that Ryan needs to deal with as a county commissioner and the county council with Daniel Elliott, and because those things are dealt with on the local level, and understanding what responsibilities there are and where and which lane that's in, whether it's local government or the county or the city or the town or the state and the federal government is really important for all of us to understand, and our system works better when everybody stays in their lane.
Who's next? Kelly? For the benefit of those that are behind you, I'll go ahead. I know they'll be able to hear you.
I just wanted to ask about Senate Bill 248. So it's passed. It's the one with public safety distributions to, if the township would ask for a distribution to the county, those public safety funds could be distributed to townships. I know it passed out at the Senate. It's been referred to Ways and Means. So I'd like to hear from Representative Mayfield to see where she stands on it.
And Kelly, I really haven't looked at the details. I've had several local government folks say, please pay attention to this, and I know that debate will happen. My understanding was that when it was first created, it was never intended to be distributed to townships. That was the intent from the beginning. So I'm just going to have to be brought up to speed with that. Townships themselves present a challenge. We did have a bill in the House to eliminate the township boards, and it was defeated something like 18 yeas and 75 nays. So that makes it sound like we're trying to protect township government. They had another bill last year about consolidating townships that was never called down for a third reading because I don't believe it had the votes to pass then either. Both of these bills, just the whole concept of township government is more complex than people think. It is not just as easy to say, it's old and antiquated and we need to get rid of it. They do provide some certain things. There are things in the state constitution that require townships. There are definitions. There, just for one, if we eliminated townships, then there'd have to be some other way, other than outside the cities and towns, to provide fire protection. And if you don't have volunteers in the township system, that means you have to establish paid firemen, which means everybody's taxes are going to go up. So there's more to consider. The last year's bill, I don't think addressed the problem. Again, this year's bill, when they say there's so much corruption, at the township level, let's eliminate the boards. Well, the boards were not ones who were corrupt. So what was happening is all the headlines of township trustees who were abusing the system, all you're doing is getting rid of the oversight that might have been there. There may be a solution to township government. What we have been presented with so far has not been the right solution. So I continue to analyze those bills as they come forward, but I could not support that one as it was written either.
I feel compelled to ask about bandwidth since I'm sitting in front of Steve here. Are you still at AT&T?
I retired a year ago, but I still keep involved.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
No kidding. You had mentioned earlier, Rod, something about bandwidth, and we've been to your office a number of times with different groups, and I'm kind of like internet to the people, and I want to make sure that we have internet available, and not just DSL. I'm talking about some really high-speed internet, which I think we're going to really need to do what you guys have been talking about, to keep Indiana growing. So the question is probably for Rod, I don't know, what's going on in Indiana, I guess, as far as bandwidth, getting it out to various areas, specifically in our area. So.
Well, again, this is really one of the bigger issues I think that Indiana can grapple with right now, and it's important to an awful lot of people. The answer, I think, is a lot of small things that are going on. As we probably all know, a couple of years ago, Senator Cook had passed it, but it's RMCs are allowed to use their easements for their lines to put in fiber, whether it's in the ground or on the poles, to serve their service areas. And our South Central Indiana RMC's got we're in the middle of an $80 million project to run that fiber to its service area, and you see the trenches being dug all over the place right now. And talking to some people that are getting that service and couldn't be happier about it. You've got in my Senate district, not so much, a little bit in Morgan County, but Endeavor is out of Cloverdale, and a pretty impressive little company, and they're doing an awful lot of fiber in the area that they can influence. And I know AT&T is trying to do some things with wireless. That's a technology that they've adopted. So it's not just fiber. Sometimes it's wireless. Sometimes it's, I don't know much about it, but kind of a satellite service that is a possibility. And a couple things policy-wise that we've been able to do with the governor is $100 million of grant money based on a kind of a rework of the toll road up in northern Indiana. And he's going to take $100 million of that and use a grant program to help communities put in high-speed internet. And that's not to boost speeds that are already slow. We've encouraged him to just address areas that have no internet at all first. So let's get everybody kind of up and going somewhere, and then we can circle back around and try and get the speeds up to places that are maybe slower than they need to be. Because this is going to be a years-long process. Another bill that came out of the Senate in the first half was to allow to help these companies use the INDOT right-of-ways so that they can get fiber or their lines along the roadways to again spread out into some of the communities that don't have any service. So there's going to be this attack is going to be done in multiple different ways by multiple companies. As I see it, really, the people that are going to be getting internet to our more rural residents are these small companies like Endeavor, and we got some others around here in central Indiana as well, because they're working really hard at it, and it's going to take a while. We're going to chip away at it.
Shameless plug here related to your issue. Last year, the commissioners conducted a public hearing and determined that broadband was really just as important as other utilities, and that we're underserved from a broadband perspective. So we passed an ordinance that would abate business personal property tax on the deployment of broadband, not abating their real estate taxes or brick and mortar, but abating the tax on the deployment of the fiber itself, provided that they initiated a project within the next 5 years as a way of continuing in partnership with the Next Level grant program and just making it more and more appealing to make that capital investment. So that's an example of where state and local, and even to some extent federal government, can all tackle a similar problem.
So that's passed?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Oh boy. Start with Steve, and I'll work
Yeah, well,
work back over.
I would just echo, just to add to what you said. I think it was last August that Lieutenant Governor Crouch named Scott Rudd. Scott was the former town manager over in Nashville and had great success in getting broadband deployed, not only in the town of Nashville, but also throughout Brown County. So South Central REMC's doing some deployment with Scott on board. There's a lot of effort being done by the state, passage of other legislation. So I think Indiana's on the right track.
Pamela Simmons. I want to address the hate crime issue that you talked about, Rod. I understand that in 2003, Indiana was very progressive and passed the reporting statute, Indiana Code 10-1331. And I would like to know if that was addressed in Senate Bill 12.
Thanks. Yeah, so in 2003, with the idea, I guess it was long before Representative Mayfield and I were in the legislature, but I think the idea was, let's keep an eye out and see what's going on with bias crimes. And it's in Title 10 of the Indiana Code, which is it's for reporting. It's a reporting statute to kind of report in. I think it goes to the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute to kind of let us know how much of that type of crime is going on. Now, in all candor, the reporting has not been really effective. I think it's not getting reported. And I can't tell you how much is out there. I think indicated earlier. It's difficult to tell. But the answer to your question is really no. That statute at this point in time doesn't come into the Senate Bill 12. Senate Bill 12 just uses bias. It doesn't reference that. There have been some discussions about referencing that statute to say that, because again it's been on the books for about 15 years now, to say bias crime is defined by Title 10. By that Title 10 statute. But in fact, there was a second reading amendment in the Senate that would have done that, but it wasn't put in, so it's not in there right now.
Was it Eugene or no person?
Sharon Green, and what I'm concerned about is the e-cigarettes and the vaping. When this stuff was first introduced, we were told that this was supposed to be a means to get people to quit smoking cigarettes. And I was never a believer of that from day one. And the news reports have shown that these kids are getting addicted to it, teenagers, I mean early teens, and they have all these flavors. And to me, that just entices these kids to do it. And then the latest news reports have said the nicotine is as high or higher than cigarettes. So, I mean, to me, it seems like we should have a high sales tax on this, some kind of limit as to a lower nicotine effect of raising the age of anyone that can purchase this. To me, it should never have been allowed to begin with unless it was long-term studies. So what's your thoughts on this?
Well, again, it's more complex than it appears. The vaping products do not always have nicotine in them. The ones that do are considered harm reduction, and you can wean them off. Because so many of these are manufactured, I won't say in a back room, because that makes it sound like it's not legitimate, but they're manufactured in small batches. They can change the concentration of nicotine, so you can start out strong, and then as you progress, you can make it weaker and weaker and weaker, and then down to nothing. You're only in the habit of vaping, and you're not actually vaping any nicotine. The products I think you're referring to are the Juuls, and it has like a pack and a half nicotine concentration in that, and it's so small that it looks like a thumb drive. That's a different type of product. And we did have in the house the nicotine tax, the vaping tax. And here's the real challenge, is there isn't a way right now, I'm told, to measure the concentration of nicotine in a liquid. So they were going to tax vape products based on their volume of liquid. So if it was a couple drops of nicotine in a bottle, you're going to be taxed on the 17.9 ounces of liquid, not how much nicotine's in it. So what does that do? That makes manufacturers want to concentrate it into smaller amounts of liquid because they get taxed less. And that's not our goal. Our goal is to tax the nicotine content. So we're in a spot right there trying to figure out how can we measure the concentration of nicotine. And that's why I voted against that bill. I voted for it in committee because I think that if it's got nicotine, it's like a tobacco product and should be taxed accordingly. But we don't have a good way of measuring it. And I don't want to tax water or oil. I only want to tax the chemical that's in it. So that's understanding that not all these products have nicotine or varying rates of nicotine in them is important to understand.
So I will agree with Representative Mayfield on the idea that it's much more efficient if we get to tax the nicotine, because that's kind of what you want to control. And you can take the Juul, which is a small little thumb drive sort of a thing that has a massive amount of nicotine in it, and other products really don't have as much, so it's probably the right way to do that. But to the point that you're making, there are some real risks, I think, from my perspective with vaping. And I was reading a Wall Street Journal article about 2 or 3 weeks ago that talked about that middle school kids are going to it in droves, and high school kids are going to it in droves. And a full 40% of kids, under 18, that start to vape are smoking cigarettes within 16 months. So it is a direct line between a vaping habit and a cigarette habit. And in fact, I think it's even interesting when there's a full-page article in the Star the other day about Juul and using it to get off of cigarettes. And I think there is some scientific evidence that says that does help. It does work to kind of start to wean you off. But they're saying get off of cigarettes and go to Juul, and Juul is basically owned by a cigarette company. So they're still planning on getting you. And the idea of kind of adding a tax to the vaping that puts them on equal footing with cigarettes, which is where I see them, frankly, that has merit to me. And I think there are a lot of risks, especially to our kids, about getting into a habit, and we're trying to find policy that will keep them away from taking up smoking.
And I don't have any problem making the minimum age to buy vaping products the same as cigarettes, not at all.
Other questions? And by the way, I failed to introduce former Attorney General Steve Carter, who's with us today. I believe you're working for Senator Braun. Is that correct? Right. Very good. Welcome.
Thank you. And I should disclaim any relationship with Senator Braun and my personal questions I'm going to address here. So our media shouldn't attribute anything to the federal office. Sorry, Senator Bray, for kind of getting out of the lanes of federal and state issues you're dealing with today. But I actually want to go back to the first issue that Commissioner Goodwin brought up. And it's interesting that he said that he was raising it because of the high public profile that the issue has. So I offer a couple questions. One, why do we think that that issue has the attention of the media that it does? Because as you've stated, there are many other issues that are important and impactful on our citizens that maybe aren't being addressed, while that one is. Second, I think Senator Bray mentioned that there's on economic development, there's quite a difference between our rural areas and our urban. Well, this is also an issue where I've heard that there's a difference between how people feel about it in rural areas and urban areas. Personally, I'm somebody that grew up on a farm for 30 years, and I've lived in a suburban area for about 30 years, and I don't think that people's hearts and minds about how they view other individuals is that much different based upon where they live. So if you could offer perspective on that. And the final question, yesterday I think I learned that the legislation that was proposed in Indiana actually was not similar to bills that have been passed in many states, but actually only the only states that have passed that legislation were in or jurisdictions were California and the District of Columbia. I don't know if that's right. If you have a thought on that, I would appreciate it if you know that detail.
Well, yeah, thanks for the questions, good thoughtful questions, and just appreciate your presence here, both as Steve Carter and also as a representative of our U.S. Senator Braun. You know, to the first question, I don't know that I have a great answer for exactly why an issue becomes a hot button issue. I recognize, along with you, I think that the media is really, really interested in the bias crimes piece of legislation. Perhaps I find it's a funny disconnect between most of the Hoosiers that I talk to who don't see this as a huge issue. However they may feel about it, they're not overly passionate about it. But then when the media spends a lot of time talking about it, and another group of people spend an awful lot of time talking about the bias crimes, and that is chambers of commerce, not necessarily Mooresville Chamber of Commerce, but the Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce would see me they would come into my office every day if I left them to talk more about it because it's so important to them. And the State Chamber of Commerce is a huge advocate for it. But the other big advocates for it, and then one of the reasons it becomes a topic of conversation, is in my new position, it has a little more light shined on it. And so I get calls from most of the major CEOs in the state of Indiana saying, you must do this. We have to have this in order for us to continue to be competitive. Now that seems to not jive necessarily with some of the numbers we're looking at. As Representative Mayfield said, you know, we're in the top 10 in lots of different economic lists here in the state of Indiana. And we broke employment records, new jobs coming into Indiana in 2017. And we broke that record again in 2018. But I just bumped into the CEO of Salesforce this week, Mr. Stutz. And he was not pleased with the way the bill came out of the Senate, and felt very free to explain that to me. And he said that he's going to lose employees because they don't want to be in a state that isn't capable of passing something like that. And it's interesting to me, and I don't necessarily know that I completely understand why, but there is real passion on both sides of this in some corners. To the other question about the rural and urban, you're right, and maybe there's some difference there in rural and urban. And if you look at it across the country, I would say philosophically, while maybe people's hearts and minds aren't necessarily different, but if you look at the way people vote, the urban and rural difference is probably a bigger difference than skin color, religion, or anything else. I mean, if you took the counties, I'm sure you know this, if you took the counties that voted for President Trump in 2016 and compared them to the number of counties that voted for Hillary Clinton, it would be about 97% for Trump and 3% for Clinton. That's not exact. Don't print that because it's not exactly right, but it's awful close to that. And so if you look at a map of the United States where all the counties that voted for Trump are red and the ones that voted for Clinton are blue, it's nearly entirely red, the map of the country is. And so there's just a real distinction there for whatever reason that is. And to the final question that you had, at least from my perspective, when you look at the list that was in Senate Bill 12 originally, not anymore, but originally, I think maybe Senator Freeman yesterday in a meeting that we were all in talked about was California and DC had that list. You know, the lists are different everywhere. Like you take gender identity, which seems to be a hot button. That list is in 17 states, but only 17 states, and people that are advocates for getting us off of this list of 5 who don't have a biased crime say we have to have gender identity in there. And is that the case? There are lots of other states that don't have it, but they were passed at different times. So it's difficult to know exactly what's supposed to be on that list, which is another argument, again, to say, well, if we don't get that list right, let's make it general so that everybody is protected. So those are some of the thoughts or perspectives I have on your question.
We can do one final quick question. If anyone has one more topic to throw down this way. Yes.
So I don't have a horse in this game on the gender or the hate crimes bill. I just want to state that up front. My name is Teresa Browning. I live in the northwest corner of the county, but couldn't get to the meeting in my district. But I printed out a 19-page report from the Pew Charitable Trust before I came here. And the perspective of people of different ages on gender is huge. And Indiana is an aging population state. We have more people on the high end, like me, over 50, than on the younger end in this state. And we need to bring more younger people into this state to work and live and raise their families, right? We're not reproducing at the rates we once were. And there's a huge disparity of opinion on this, and that's why your leader of Salesforce is concerned. Because he's not hiring people like me to write code, unfortunately, even if I could write code. And we're spending all this money on economic development to bring businesses in and to bring young people in. We're remodeling our downtowns and everything. But we're not paying attention to the things that maybe concern some of them about how we treat other people. People who maybe can't speak up for themselves right now. And so I'd be happy to give you a copy of what Pew showed, but the younger demographic feels much different about this. And I would say there might be a couple of people under 30 here, but maybe not many in their 20s. And if they don't feel welcome, if they don't feel like a state somewhat represents their interests and listens to them, they are going to move to those urban areas, which I don't want to demonize. You know, I don't want an urban-rural divide either, because I moved here from an urban area. But, so I don't have a question, I guess.
Thank you, Teresa.
But I have a 19-page report.
And willing to share. Thank you. We are right at 11 o'clock, or actually just a couple of minutes before our stopping time. I want to take one more quick. Sure.
I just want to take a second to maybe do a speed round where I get to ask you questions. And then you can indicate what you think just by holding up a yes or no. This has come up a few times, and you know, I'm going to draw this out of left field. We have a 7% sales tax in Indiana. So when our sales go down, our income goes down. What are your feelings if we were to lower that into the 3 to 3.5% range for sales tax and taxing services at the same rate? So we have a broad base of, a more consistent base of taxation in the state. So 3.5%, but we tax sales and services.
I don't know, I wasn't prepared for this. Well, that's what, since we've been talking about it though, let's just talk about the biased crimes. If you take the biased crimes bill and with the idea of voting for Senate Bill 12 in its current form, which just says generally bias is an aggravator for sentencing, who supports that kind of an idea? Okay, now let's flip it and add a list back in that's race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, things like that. Who would be in favor of adding that with the list then? Okay, thank you very much.
I believe if you don't mind me chiming in on that, I believe at the last one you had down in Martinsville, somebody had mentioned a includes but not limited to list. That might be a good in-between.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, the question then becomes, well, what's the, is it necessary? Because there is some risk in Indiana law, and I think case law across the nation, that when you put a list, when you put a specific list in there, then that is the list you intended, and other folks aren't intended to be on that list. The included but not limited to language could maybe kind of help with that, but there's still a risk of, well, these are the people that you mentioned. If you wanted other people, you would have mentioned them too, and that can become problematic.
Danny, I brought that up on some other legislation I was trying to author a few years ago. Can we have an includes but not limited to? And our drafting rules indicate that we really don't do that because it does present additional problems. So it was a good idea, but I'd actually asked that question on something else and gotten the we don't want to go there type of answer.
Thank you, Representative Mayfield, for the reminder on the cards. It's good to see from a visual standpoint. Thank you for bringing those. It's obvious that so very many issues come these folks' way at breakneck pace, and there are opinions on all sides of the aisle, but I think we can agree that they have approached every question posed to them in a thoughtful way, whether you were on their side and I'm seeing some green, thank you, Steve. Whether you were on the side of their position or not, it was handled in an intellectual and thoughtful way, and we can all hope that that's what our political involvement would be about. So let's give a final and hearty round of applause to Senator Bray and Representative Mayfield. Thank you deeply for your service and commitment to Morgan County and Indiana. I want to give just a really quick, and we need to collect those cards as you head out, a quick thank you again to Mooresville Chamber of Commerce, Platinum sponsors Big O Tires, Citizens Bank, Community Ford, American Legion 103, Showtime Cinema, Greg Hubler, Chevrolet, and Nice Pack. Also gold sponsors for the Chamber, First Merchants Bank, Carlisle Branson Funeral Service, Home Bank, South Central Indiana REMC, and Ward's Apparel. And supporting our event specifically today, Pamela Siddons of Siddons Law Office. Thank you, Pamela. And also Jeff Banning and Banning Engineering. Thank you to both of them for helping to underwrite today's program. I've been given two quick announcements to give to you. Mooresville Chamber will hold its annual dinner Thursday evening, March 21st. It's in about 2 weeks here at Jones Crossing, just down the street on 67. This is open to the public. This is the event where we award the 2018 Mooresvillian of the Year, as well as the Business Person of the Year, and I can attest to you from attending over the last 10 years or more, it's a really great celebration of what it means to live and work in Mooresville. You can buy tickets through this Thursday, March 14th, and you can also purchase them from Mindy Taylor in the lobby today before you go. She will accept MasterCard and Visa on the tickets as well. I've got a note here in red to make sure to tell you that. Final announcement before we head on our way to, I'm sure, what's a busy Saturday. The Joe Bikeman Memorial Cleanup will be held on Saturday, April 13th. Saturday, April 13th. Flyers are available in the lobby with more information. This is a great way to both memorialize Joe, who is a longtime public servant here in Mooresville, but also to all kind of join together and lock arms and keep our community looking clean. It's a great event. We encourage your participation on April 13th. Thank you for being here, and have a wonderful Saturday. Take care.